welcome back to my channel. It's been a while since I've done a video about van life, so I figured I would just do one now. I want to talk about the aspects of van life that people don't always talk about or bring up, because normally online you see like seamless vlogs of people's days where it's like, you know, they see all these pretty views, things are great, they're making coffee with their boyfriend in the morning and they share a van and they have a dog and everything's perfect. So I was like, maybe I'll just make a little video about aspects of van life that people don't really take into consideration all the time, that I think will be kind of helpful if you're thinking about doing van life, and just paint a little bit of a better picture or a fuller picture of what it's like to live in your van and travel full time. So I'm going to be talking about that right now. So the first aspect that isn't always talked about a lot is the cost of van life. I've mentioned it in a couple videos, but basically, you know, you do save money by not paying rent, but there is a lot of cost when you're driving around in your van all the time. A lot of the people you see online on YouTube doing van life make their money online. They're like digital nomads or whatever. Maybe they have a blog, maybe they have a YouTube channel that makes money. But for most people, budgeting for a van life trip is kind of a big thing that you have to do because, well, most people don't make money online. And so if you're saving up for a while so that way you could take a long trip in a van, you should be aware of some of the costs. So when I was on my van life trip, every 2 weeks I did a spreadsheet of my finances where I just tallied up everything that I spent and what categories. And I think a question a lot of people are curious about is how much it costs to drive across the country in terms of gas. So on my trip, I spent 4 months in my van traveling across America. I drove 13,000 miles in total, and the average amount of money that I spent each month on gas was around $350. Obviously, there's a lot of variables to this. If you stay in one place for a long time, the gas goes down. I mean, there are some months where I spent like $120, but then there are other months where I spent like $430. It just depends on where you're going and how much you're driving. And also depending on the state that you're in. Like, I started in California and drove out, so gas was a lot cheaper everywhere. Outside of California on my road trip, pretty much everywhere was under $3. That was like the norm, versus in California at the time when I left, it was like $3.59 a gallon. So I kind of saved money by not being in California. Even the toll roads in the East Coast didn't make up for the amount of money that I was saving on gas by not being in California. So it does depend on where you are, but for me personally, driving across the country for 4 months, it was around $350 a month. And then the second biggest pocket of spending that I indulged in on the road trip was definitely in terms of food. Before I left on the road trip, I was saving up canned goods from the food bank at my college at the time because I was living in my car when I was in college. I have a whole video on that. But basically, I was stocking up cans so that way I would have enough food to eat in case I couldn't spend money on food. And this was really helpful for me for the most part because, yeah, I just could eat out of cans, just canned beans and canned corn, man. Like, oh god, I've eaten so much of that in my life. But there are of course also times where I'd want to go out to eat, especially like going through the South for the first time. I wanted to have soul food, and then I just like to go to restaurants every now and then. And that was something I really had to scale back when I started doing my finances, because there were a couple weeks where I was just spending so much money eating out that it was really just not sustainable. So it's definitely something you have to keep an eye on. But the other reason why the food cost can be so much more living in a van than not living in a van, which people don't always expect, is because you're not cooking. Unless you have some sort of like stove setup, which, you know, some of the more advanced campers do. But if you're just living out of your car or your minivan like me, not being able to cook food really does increase the price of groceries and stuff like that. Like, you could get a loaf of white bread and like peanut butter and just have like foldovers or whatever if you need to. But like, for the most part, if you're buying fresh fruit or vegetables, the inability to cook it, like being unable to cook like beans and rice and like meal prep or whatever to try to save money, it's like, no, you kind of have to buy fresh foods that will spoil, which could be healthier, but it also definitely costs a lot more because, yeah, you can't cook anything. So for me, eating out of cans that I had already stored up was really helpful for me, but that's obviously not glamorous at all. I mean, eating cold beans out of a can is it's not fun, but it does get the job done. So outside of cost of van life, the other unglamorous aspect people kind of brush over is how weather affects your van life. I experienced this especially when I was living in my car in college, because where I lived, it would kind of storm a lot. But then even on my road trip, like when I was in the East Coast, I was in the middle of a nor'easter for like 4 days. And having all that rain coming down can, on the one hand, be really nice because you get to fall asleep to the sound of rain and it's kind of peaceful. But on the other hand, it's easy to bring a lot of that water into your car, which sucks because your car gets moldy. I had to get into the habit in college of hanging up my socks when I would get into the car if it was raining really hard outside, or hanging up whatever wet clothes I could in any way that I could around my car, because if you just leave it in a clump, it's gonna get moldy and smelly. And you kind of have to do more laundry when it's raining outside so that way your stuff doesn't get moldy. These seatbelt things also sometimes track mold up them, and you have to like get Lysol wipes and clean them off. Generally, just living in your car, you're creating humidity and stuff by breathing in it. If you keep your windows closed when you're sleeping, like I normally do. And so naturally, condensation and mold does arise. And it's just really important when it's raining hard outside to try your best to keep everything as dry as possible. Try to get in your car in and out very quickly. Keep your clothes in bags or hung up when you're not wearing them if they're wet, because you really don't want that wetness to spread throughout your living environment. And then of course the other weather aspect is very hot weathers. I mean, when I first started my road trip, it was like the dead middle of summer and it was just really, really hot in my car during the daytime. I basically just had to be outside of my car during the daylight hours, which is great because you get to see a lot of things, but also can be difficult because sometimes you just want to chill in your car, but you can't because it's like 90 degrees outside and you'll literally like bake. And then another unglamorous side of van life is the times where you're not out exploring and hiking and traveling and driving and doing all that fun stuff. A lot of the times you do just want to chill, and if it is too hot in your car to chill, which is honestly most of the time, you spend a lot of time indoors at other locations. Like for me, there were days where I would spend entire days at Barnes & Noble or Starbucks just watching Netflix on my laptop. And then another thing I did a lot at nighttime was just go to Redbox at Walmart or whatever and then just put the DVD in my laptop and watch that at nighttime. But basically the indoor time of van life isn't really talked about a lot, but basically like what I did, I spent a lot of time in libraries especially, and then Barnes & Nobles and Starbucks just watching things, reading books, doing all that sort of indoor thing, which is a fine thing to do regardless of if you're in a van or not. Like I like to just hang out at libraries, but it definitely is a sort of unglamorous side than what you see online because it's just something that most people do anyway, just inside of their house instead of at a library or a bookstore or whatever. And then the other big unglamorous side of van life that probably is the first thing that comes to people's mind is the lack of security. I personally got kind of adjusted to living in my car because I lived in it in college, but even on my road trip, I mean, being across the country where you don't know anybody and then just living in your car where everything that you own that's valuable to you is like easily a rock, you know, the distance of a rock through the window away, can be a little bit unnerving. And I've definitely had nightmares about people breaking in, but you know, thankfully no one's ever broken in here and it's mostly just been safe all the time. But feeling unsafe is definitely something every van lifer goes through at some point. Normally at the beginning, maybe for the first month or so, things can be a little bit unnerving, but eventually you do adjust. I mean, it's kind of the same thing as living in a house or apartment that's floor level to the ground. I mean, people could really break in wherever you are. And then another big fear I had a lot on my van trip is like, what if my car gets towed? Like imagine parking where you're not supposed to park and then leaving for the day and you come back and your house is gone. And like, if you can't afford to go get your car from the impound or whatever, or maybe like be able to afford a hotel overnight if you can't get it that day, that could be like some really bad news because, you know, then you have to sleep outside, which sucks and is way more scary. And it just sucks to watch your house get evicted. Unfortunately I had to have this car towed one time while I was living in it, but I was in my hometown at the time, so it was okay because I was just able to stay at my parents' house until I could get my car back, but that really sucked. Another unglamorous aspect of van life is weird looks that you might get from people, because pretty much people are going to be able to tell that you live in your car, not all the time, depending on what your car looks like. But some of the times, yeah, they'll see you waking up in the morning, brushing your teeth. I kind of talk about this in my van life in college video, but people are going to notice from time to time that you live in your car, and people might, you know, judge you or look at you weird. It's normally not really that big of a deal, but I think for some people it's a bigger deal than for others. Another unglamorous aspect, of course, is hygiene. Normally, you know, on my road trip, I was able to shower pretty much every day because I have a membership at Planet Fitness and they have, you know, so many locations everywhere. But in some places, they don't have locations. I mean, I think driving through Texas, it was hard to find some. Like sometimes you do have to go a day or two, maybe even 3 without taking a shower, depending on if you can find a place to shower in the location that you're in. And I've talked about this in a couple of videos too, but when it comes to going to the bathroom, sometimes, you know, you can't find a bathroom and you have to pee outside, which is, you know, not really that big of a deal. But then sometimes if it's like really pouring rain outside, I always keep an empty venti Starbucks cup or a giant soda cup from McDonald's, and then sometimes if it's really pouring outside and you can't just go out and find somewhere where nobody is to go pee in peace, you kind of have to pee in like a cup like that and just dump it out, which is kind of gross, but that's just the way that it is. And then of course, oil changes and car maintenance. Thankfully I never had a flat tire. I actually really lucked out on my trip. I feel like I never had any issues with my car. But of course, after, you know, X amount of miles, for some people it's 3,000, for sometimes it's more, you do have to get your oil changed, of course. And, you know, being that I drove 13,000 miles, I had to get it changed quite a few times. And And then the only downside to that being in your van is like you just have to wait there until they're done. Sometimes it takes hours and you're just kind of waiting there. And if your car needs more maintenance than that, like if you have a real issue, then you're just gonna be waiting a lot longer, and hopefully it's not a multi-day process. Otherwise you'd have to like find a hotel or sleep on the street somewhere until your car is ready. And then of course the biggest downside maybe to being in the van and the van life is the whole loneliness aspect. Obviously there's a lot of good that can happen when you spend a decent amount of time alone, but also loneliness is like a really big issue when you're living in your car by yourself. If you're in a different time zone than your friends, sometimes you can't just like call up a friend, you know, because maybe they're asleep, or maybe it's too early, or maybe they're at work or whatever. And then if you're traveling a lot, going state to state, you can't really stop and make friends, like you don't have enough time to really do that. And then also just being able to experience all these great and beautiful things and places, it's like sometimes you just want to share that with somebody, but if you don't have anyone who's with you, you kind of can't. Loneliness would probably be too big of an issue to like get into really deeply in this video. Maybe I'll make a whole nother video about that. But basically, even if someone is like posting on social media during their van life adventure or whatever, chances are they're probably feeling pretty lonely a lot of the time. I mean, being alone and like experiencing all these things and all these changes and all of that, I mean, it's a lot to go through by yourself, especially if you're doing it for a really long time. Okay, now I'm all sweaty because it's like warm in here and I've been recording for like half an hour, but basically that's my video of unglamorous sides of van life. If you have any comments or ideas or questions, leave them down below and I will get to you. If you're interested in this kind of content, hit the subscribe button, give it a like if you liked it, a thumbs down if you did not, and I will see you guys next time. Hello everyone, it's me a little bit later. I just want to say, you know, despite all these unglamorous aspects of van life, obviously it's something that I very much recommend. I think if it's in your heart to, you know, go on a trip like this and you have the means to be able to do so, or are able to work towards those means, definitely listen to that intuition, go for it, all of that. This isn't supposed to discourage anybody. I'm just, you know, obviously talking a little bit about what you might expect that maybe you weren't exactly expecting. But yeah, back to the video, or the end, if this is at the end. It probably is. Okay, bye.